Hello, my name is Lloyd Watts. I'm the CEO and founder of Neocortix. Today I'll be talking about distributed computing for COVID-19 vaccine research on ARM devices. Here's an overview of the talk. First, I'll give a brief introduction to the protein folding projects Rosetta at Home and Folding at Home and how they do COVID-19 research. Then most of the talk will be about how we built those two projects for ARM, so that they could be used by potentially billions of mobile devices, Raspberry Pis, and ARM-based servers. Then I'll talk about our progress on deployment and how you can participate in this project. Both Rosetta at Home and Folding at Home are large, well-established, volunteer distributed computing protein folding projects. In February 2020, both of these projects added COVID-19 sub-projects so that they could help in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Both of these projects have been focusing on understanding the coronavirus spike ACE2 receptor, which the virus uses to detect and attack human cells. Rosetta at Home is primarily concerned with static protein folding, that is, the static shapes that the folded proteins can take. Folding at Home is primarily concerned with molecular dynamics, that is, the way that the folded proteins can move and change shape over time, which can be very important for exposing certain receptor sites which can be blocked by antiviral drugs. Both of these projects have historically only been offered on Intel processors. At Neocortix, we realized that we could bring potentially billions of new ARM devices to help fight this pandemic. But to do that, we would need to build both projects for ARM processors. I'd like to acknowledge the multi-person effort that was needed to make this project happen. Rex St. John at ARM made key introductions to the Rosetta and Folding at Home projects and to the ARM developer community. At Neocortix, Dmitry Moskalchuk did the core build and development work, and Michael Coffey did the deployment work. In the ARM developer community, Sahaj Sarup, David Tischler, and Ed Vielmetti worked on the native build and testing for Rosetta and deployment via foldforcovid.io. Dr. David Kim was our primary contact at Rosetta at Home, and Dr. Greg Bowman and Joseph Coughlin were our primary contacts at Folding at Home. Since the ARM Dev Summit is for ARM developers, the organizers of the meeting asked me to talk about some of the tips and tricks that we use for building such large distributed computing applications for ARM. Dmitry has graciously provided 5 examples of useful development techniques. In his work, Dmitry took the approach of doing a cross-build, that is, he used large Intel servers to do the compiling of code for ARM targets. Other people in the ARM community, such as Sahaj Sarup and David Tischler, were interested in doing a native build, that is, they used large ARM servers to natively build the code for ARM targets. The Rosetta project took about 2 days for Dmitry to do the ARM cross-build. By contrast, the Folding at Home project took about 3 months, since the project had a much larger scope, including upgrading the GROMACS core from version 5 to version 2020 and adding several new features for the Folding at Home team. The first development technique used in the Rosetta project we will talk about is the idea of using Docker containers for reproducible builds. This may be a well-known best practice in the ARM developer community, but the technique was not in use already in the Rosetta project. So when the time came to deliver the Rosetta ARM build, the Rosetta team was thrilled to receive the deliverable in the form of a Docker container, which eliminated a huge amount of effort for them to match Dmitry's development environment. Dmitry also included the dependency on the specific BOINC version, which also saved a lot of effort for the Rosetta team. The second development technique used in the Rosetta project was the use of correct null pointers for ARM. When Dmitry was doing the cross-build for ARM, he saw that one of the library dependencies, libxml2, wasn't building properly. The root cause of the problem was that the libxml2 code had an Intel-specific assumption, namely that an empty list could be identified by the fact that it had a null pointer. To make it work on ARM, Dmitry had to do a different kind of test, namely he had to use a correct ARM-specific value for the pointer to a reference empty list. The code snippet is shown in the right panel. It creates a dummy empty list and uses a pointer to that empty list as a reference value to check on a new list to see if it is empty. And of course, he had to change all occurrences of this problem in the code. The third technique, which was used in the Folding at Home project, was another example of an Intel-specific assumption which does not work for ARM. The particular assumption is that the char type is signed by default on Intel processors, but it is unsigned by default on ARM processors. Folding at Home built their code with the Intel assumption, and this caused a lot of low-level crashes when running the code on ARM. The code example shows how this can cause a crash. In the second line, the char x value can be set to a value of -2 under some conditions, which works fine on Intel because char is signed by default. But on ARM, setting x to -2 results in x taking a value of 254 because char is unsigned on ARM. And then the subsequent logic fails on ARM because x does not have its proper assigned value of -2. Dimitri's solution was to simply add a compiler option -fsigned char, which enforces the Intel assumption over onto the ARM platform. This solves the problem. The fourth technique was to use correct CPU assumptions. In the Folding at Home code, there were a number of Intel-specific assumptions about CPU ID and other CPU features like SSE2 and AVX, which are not valid on ARM processors. Dimitri had to actually reverse engineer the ARM features and present them in a compatible way which matched the Intel features as much as possible, as shown in the code snippet. The fifth technique was to handle an incorrect minimal version number of certain exported symbols in libc, libm, and so on. The Folding at Home core was working on Intel but crashing on ARM. The reason is that libc is a very old part of the development environment. For Intel processors, libc appears in a very early version, 2.2.5, of the component availability of these libraries. For ARM processors, libc appears in a much later version, 2.17. It is necessary to instruct the compiler to look for the correct version, otherwise the application will crash. Once the projects were built, the next step was to deploy the projects onto devices out in the field. At Neocortix, Michael Coffey took the lead on the deployment effort. Neocortix has deployed both Rosetta at Home and Folding at Home onto our captive network of about 600 paid mobile devices. At this moderate scale, we've been able to complete significant numbers of work units in both projects, as shown by the 2 certificates of computation for Rosetta at Home and Folding at Home. The extended ARM community, particularly Sahaj Sarup, David Tischler, and Ed Vielmetti, had other volunteer devices for deployment, including Raspberry Pi and ARM-based servers. In particular, David set up the foldforcovid.io service, which allows Raspberry Pi and ARM-based servers to be volunteered to contribute to the Rosetta project, and they reached a total of about 6,000 volunteer devices. How you can participate. Coming soon from Neocortix, we will be launching the Pocket Science app, which will allow potentially billions of phone owners to contribute their processing power to coronavirus research on both Rosetta and Folding at Home. Screenshots of Pocket Science are shown on the slide. You can choose which project you want to contribute to and watch the progress and see your accumulated work units as your device completes work for these important causes. The app only does work when you're connected to the charger and connected to Wi-Fi, so you don't run down your battery or run up your data bill. We'll make announcements about Pocket Science when the app is completed and ready for the public to use. You can also volunteer your Raspberry Pi and ARM-based server devices now for Rosetta at Home by going to foldforcovid.io. Finally, there's another way to participate as a developer using distributed cloud services running on mobile devices, that is, by becoming a user of Neocortix Cloud Services. Just go to cloud.neocortix.com, sign up for a free account with 100 free hours. It looks like any large cloud provider like AWS or Google Cloud Platform, but with the big difference that your instances are running in secure containers on ARM mobile devices all over the world. You can follow the easy tutorials to quickly set up your account, launch instances, and run your own code, for example C, Go, or Python, or other applications like Blender for rendering, TensorFlow for deep learning, and load testing applications like Locust, JMeter, K6, and Gatling. We hope these ARM development techniques have been useful to you, and we hope to see you as a user over at Neocortix Cloud Services and as a volunteer user of Pocket Science to help with COVID-19 research once it's announced for general use. Thank you very much.